15. To get everybody quiet before he goes. Before we start the webinar, I'd like if we could. So the webinar is back on, and we are now going to gavel in the CS-BARS meeting. I want to welcome everyone to the second CS-BARS meeting in less than a week. This one half as long as the one before it. So I want to thank everyone who has been a participant in the meetings, both of the public and the CS-BARS meeting. We, as I said at the beginning of the last meeting, the agenda that was posted for the October 11th meeting was going to be carried over in large part to this meeting as well. So it was going to be a continuation of that discussion. The minutes of the meeting have been posted on the website as attached to the agenda. So I just want to make sure everyone has been given copies of the minutes or has been able to access it on the website. So before we move to that, Michael, can I have you take roll call?
Greg Brandis.
Here.
Jackie Gardina.
Here.
Kareem Gongora. Here. Jay Frickberg.
Present.
Martin Pritikin. Here. Brian Pertl.
Here.
Thank you, Michael. So the minutes have been distributed both in hard copy and they're attached to the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? So, Marty, is there any changes, corrections, edits?
Jackie, no changes, corrections, but I have to abstain because I wasn't present.
Thank you.
Remember, it's not unanimous, whatever it is.
So all those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And one abstention with Greg. All right, thank you. Before we get started with the agenda, I just want to ask if there's any public comment for anything that's not on the agenda. We'll provide public comment opportunity as the agenda moves forward on the other items. Any public comment on anything not on the agenda? Okay, great. So moving forward to the staff report.
So there's no further staff report at this meeting because there was an extensive staff report last Friday.
Okay. So on E, request for further feedback on State Bar proposed changes to annual reporting regarding collection of data on demographics, retention, and attrition data. I believe, unlike the agenda for last week, the one addition for this week is a presentation on a conversation that we started at the Law School Assembly and that we continued at other CS-BARS meetings, which is the collection of demographic data from all law schools. And I believe we're going to have a presentation on that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful.
So I'd like to welcome Carolina Amarante here who's been working with us on this project to discuss further updates. And she'll be handing out handouts here, and this presentation is posted on the website under this agenda item as well.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Carolina Amarante Torrero. I'm a senior program analyst with the Office of Research and Institutional Accountability. And I'll be going through recommendations on. Let me try that one more time. I'll be going through recommendations for including additional demographic metrics in the annual report. And before going into many slides of charts, I wanted to take a step back and talk about where this work is essentially stemming from.
There were stars up there.
And so earlier this year,
Taking their
the board
talents
agreed
elsewhere.
upon the strategic goal 4, which focused on supporting access to legal services for low and moderate income Californians, promote policies and programs to eliminate bias, and promote an inclusive environment in the legal system.
I know the name.
And for the public it serves
I like the
and
name
strive
Charlie.
to achieve a
I don't know
statewide
why.
attorney population
I think it
that
reminds me of
reflects the rich
Chestnut
demographics of the
Street.
state population. And
little
one
spread that
item
goes
under
in.
that goal is specifically
Charlie.
looking
Fruity
at
spread.
working with the Cal
I hate being on
Accredited
camera.
law schools and registered
Like
No,
you
the
feel the need
joint
that we
is
have to
not
see. I know, and then all of a sudden
reporting
big old
requirements
pictures.
Yeah.
by later this
I think
year.
it was like stretched.
I just have to
out.
say I look so much better than I do on the camera.
So in doing that, the
I hate to say
office,
that.
my office,
pictures like
Araya,
that is not what I
admissions as well as Office of Access Inclusion have been meeting to think about the data. And to think about the data, the goal of this data would be to understand enrollment,
Andrew.
graduation, and attrition trends
I barely recognized you
different
with all
demographic
the
groups
beard and stuff going
across
on.
all California law schools.
I was like, who's that guy? Is that
And the
IT?
timeline we're thinking for data collection is
Oh my gosh.
obtaining the aggregate data from the schools
You look like a total
in
like
2020
grown up.
with the support of training materials and documentation to
Like the
facilitate
areas,
that.
or you need to shave it for the costume?
So this may be very
Or
familiar
secret.
to most of you. This is the current data collection when it comes to demographics by gender and then also by race ethnicity. And this looks at demographics for those who are enrolled per their year in law school. The next chart, which for those who are in the audience, my apologies, we expanded
Couple
upon
weeks.
these metrics.
It's gonna be like way down
in two
here in a
ways.
couple weeks.
We included a non-binary option for gender,
What was that show?
an option to also to decline. We also expanded the
crazy
years up to 7th year, understanding that for non-traditional students, it may take more than the average 3 or 4 years to
I know.
their
That's
their
totally
law school
looks
career.
hilarious.
like. Is that
We
true?
also expanded on
Should we go
the
on the
race ethnicity
Polycom because it
population
looks like it's muting them
and the
whenever we talk or
categories
something.
specifically.
Sure.
And these categories represent
guys-
the
Ivy,
categories
can you
that
hear
are
us?
included in the My State Bar Profile Survey, the attorney census, which attorneys have completed
extension
this year, and we
2429.
received over 100,000 responses on.
Oh, bummer.
Additionally, we
Never
would want to also obtain the totals across the gender and the race ethnicity. When looking at an additional data collection point,
Oh, it's hot water.
we understand right now there is data that's obtained in the annual report
Yeah,
on
you can hot water.
those
It's so
students
good.
that are
No lemon or
returning their
anything?
second year and the following year.
It's delicious.
When
Stevia?
looking
No,
at
stevia.
ABA
No, I
data,
just like the
data
hot
collection
water. It's like
practices,
very
we saw
relaxing.
that
No, I had tea
transfer
earlier.
in
Having
was
a
a data
cup of
point
tea.
Hot water
that was
stevia.
collected.
Won't be pretty.
So similar to our enrollment population, we
She's
want
that
to
one who's
understand
like running the
demographic
gets all
makeup
the
of those students who are
the stuff they
transferring
used to
into
make the
the
meth
school.
from like the fast food place.
Hot water and stevia?
Hot
With
water
respect
stevia.
to attrition, and this
She's
is
like a crazy
something that we look closely to.
No, she's like this like
and
corrupt
research,
businesswoman who
what
works
is the
for,
best
like, a
way for
restaurant
capturing
supply
nutrition
company, like,
information.
Oh, okay.
She gets imports
We
these
understand that
chemicals
it's a two-step
they use to make
process.
You-
So we
oh,
would be looking
she's trying
at collecting
Last night,
race,
I should not
ethnicity,
have watched this, but
gender
I love
for
Chicago's,
students,
you know, Chicago Fire, Chicago
who are
PD.
not
You ever watch
returning
those?
from the
There's
previous
multiple
year. So what does that
Chicagos.
mean?
Yeah, and
A
Chicago Med, they're
baseline
all
would
in
have to be
Chicago Wednesday.
established.
Anyway,
We would
it's really good.
first
It's about
obtain
it. It's
enrollment
about
with the new demographic information.
Anyway, it's
and
it's
then
about what it
the
sounds like.
Chicago.
Following year,
Chicago, and
ask
the
for
medical, and then
information
the
on those
firehouse,
students that did
and
not
then the
return.
third one is PD. So it's about like this
So it'll be a
special
two-step
unit that does
process,
things.
and then,
Anyway, it's very awesome.
the-
It's awesome.
the
But last
analysis
night
would
they
then
did
look
a
at the
3-hour cross, like all 3 episodes. on this bacterial
When it comes to
infection,
total
like
student
a
enrollment
terrorist attack.
and total number of
Oh,
JD
it was
awarded,
awful. I shouldn't have watched it the whole
we
3
looked
hours. I was
at,
like, this is terrible.
the
Why am I watching this? And all day long, I've
different,
been like kind of paranoid. I'm like, I
groups
can
of
never unwatch
diversity.
that.
so not
and
only
that's so
looking at
real.
race,
That-
ethnicity,
that could
and
happen. I
gender,
hope so. I'm sure.
but also
It's like
expanding
when you
it
get
to
a
sexual
report that there's lice
orientation,
in your child's
disability,
body.
and veteran status.
No.
So
I've
again, this would be
gotten
limited
lots
to
of
those
times.
who
You're like,
are
get over here.
JD
Okay, you're
awarded,
good.
The
and
worst
then
is
You're like,
total
which
student
kid is
enrollment
it?
would
Share
be
batting helmets.
Oh, no.
That's how I got it.
captured in these
a
two
bunch of
grids
times.
with the expanded
They make you share batting
demographic
helmets.
group.
No, it's like you do, and then like after a while you figure out that that's how you're getting it. So then your
exactly.
parents are like, I'm gonna spend the $30 to buy your own batting
In
helmet.
developing
Rather than
these
spending
charts,
$30 on
we understand that
I wonder how
this
that
is
happens.
a
Plastic,
shift
that's crazy.
in
Well, there's
current
like a
data
foam
collection
pattern
practices.
too, right? So like, you just
And
take
as
the
an analyst, I understand
one.
data cannot always
I didn't think boys-
be
And then-
I didn't think
then-
boys got
Then I
it.
had two brothers who were also
magically
playing
developed.
so, like,
It
the
takes
chances
time,
of
it takes a
Oh.
process.
one of us
And so we want to support that process, one by providing you with these metrics in
one of my brother
advance,
gets
have a
back.
discussion on them,
I got it all
and then
the
think
time, but I
about
thought
what
it
are
was just
best
girls with
practices
long
to
hair.
obtain the data
Just
points that
hair
are
all over the
needed.
place.
Also, there is a lot of research on
We
best
can't hear
practices
them
for
though.
collecting,
Do they have a
collecting
color comment?
this information
go
from
silent every
student
time we start
populations
talking.
that can be made available.
It's just like that.
And also
fever
looking
where-
at how this data compares to WASC and IPEDS. In doing the analysis, there can be a crosswalk on the different groups, on the different demographic groups.
They can hear us though, right?
And so again,
Yeah.
providing support on
It's
how
not
to
like
best collect this information.
unworkable, it's just
And with the
easier.
goal of trying to implement
Um,
these new data collection standards in 2020.
you're grabbing
So I'm going to stop here,
like a speakerphone to use.
open up to any questions or any feedback.
Nice. Okay. I just saw them.
First, from the committee, any thoughts, initial thoughts that you want to share before we? Yeah, Jay?
Just a question on the second to last slide, the one labeled new metrics demographics breakdown. On the left-hand column enrolled, I presume that's enrolled in just one semester, as an example, fall of that year.
I'm sorry, is this slide here, the new metric?
Okay.
Yes,
So this would be the total enrollment in the school.
but
Just once we start talking, they go like almost.
Yes,
mute.
that's-
It like
Can't
it
hear
only
them.
lets one side talk
versus
at
the
once.
right-hand
See that?
column, JD
Like we
degrees
can't.
awarded.
And that's not gonna work for
We
us.
look at
is
Carolyn's
enrolled
talking, we
in
can't
Got
hear.
everyone
one
talking,
semester
everyone
or
talking
for
at the same time, right?
academic year, which can go from fall the preceding year to the current spring to the current summer. There's three.
No.
So we would need to agree in the point of
Okay.
Awesome.
time.
Okay.
And so
Cool.
I think this is where we would think about either we look at one semester or for the whole academic year. And we haven't made that decision, but
Should we
it's something that we
try-
want to
or do
get
we
feedback
wait
on.
until the Polycom gets there?
I just wanted to say, given that this would be something that would be incorporated as part of the annual report, that is a snapshot. So that would be a point in time. So
Hi,
at the
Christine.
time.
Haven't
that
seen you in a
they
long time,
what
but
we do,
hi.
and for us, it's in January for the previous year. It would be a snapshot
Let me
of
see.
that.
Sorry.
So again, just to make sure I understand, does that mean that the enrolled component would be probably fall of that reporting year?
Yeah.
And then the graduating year would be the previous graduating year? So you have a
So
full
that we,
academic year
you
that
can call
total
us
schools ends May,
this
June.
number 2429.
Other members of the committee?
I'm gonna come back after public comment.
And I'll just mention, because I know it's a conversation that we've had other times, is that the concerns, some of the concerns raised, and I'll open to public comment for others, are the capacity
Yeah.
of schools to collect the data, given size of staff, sophistication of software, willingness of students to disclose. The size of the data sample for each of our schools, which then raises privacy concerns. Understanding
make sure
how
we're
it's going to
not
be
too loud
used
on our
by the
volume
state
then.
bar in terms of understanding the pipeline into the profession, but its availability based on a public records request for individual schools
then
data
just
as
remind
it's
each other
provided
if
to the
anybody
state
gets
bar. So
too
I know those
excited.
were some of the concerns that we've raised in
like-
previous conversations
It's funny, but
with
it's
the state
also-
bar about CALs and registered schools collecting the data. But I do want to open it up for public comment for others to add or expound on anything that members of the committee have said. I was just waiting. I knew it was coming.
So I'm Elizabeth Zier from Monterey College of Law. To echo everything that Jackie just said, this has been an ongoing conversation, so our concerns were well summarized.
I'm surprised
do
it's
a
not
lot
a
of
standard
academic
request.
counseling,
Most people don't
and
ask
one of
for
the
it.
other concerns worthy
The
of note is
poly
that
comment instead of the
if
speaker.
we are reporting on reasons for dismissal,
Well, usually for
then
video
that is
conference,
going to
you,
fundamentally
if you're just
alter
doing
my counseling
straight video conference,
relationship
you
with
usually
my
don't need
students.
to use the phone.
So
Oh,
there are two
Unless it's a,
categories
like I
we
said,
have
unless
right
there's some
now,
sort of issue,
academic
or
and non-academic.
you have someone from
My
outside
concern
coming
being
in,
that
then
that is a bit of a rabbit hole, and so I want to be very sensitive to the nature of my confidential relationship. So that's one point of note that we didn't cover. And then some of the other things to note, our students are very unlikely to respond to a number
Who
of
said
the
that?
sexual orientation and gender identification questions. So we
So
will
almost
end
like-
up with a very large number of NAs.
2429.
yeah, make sure you mute the
Any other public comments? Returning to the committee. Greg?
Hi, yes, thank you. So I'm looking at the State Bar strategic goal and the accompanying objective, I guess. Forget the term that's used for those. And they are certainly noble and certainly connected. And I do understand the reason why having this information would allow us to draw conclusions about, or at least have better than speculation about why certain things happen. Obviously, I echo many of the concerns that were raised before, but I also return to my original question, which is, so we just heard that we surveyed, what was it, 7,000 law students, and we got 2,500 responses. And so I guess my question is it necessary for us to go through this process, or can we not just survey the law students, ask the demographic questions in a similar fashion? Can the State Bar not just conduct a survey of the law students? And while this presumably doesn't get at the level of data down to the individual level, maybe that's part of the point of addressing the concerns that folks have, is not getting down to this individual identifiable level. Would not, with proper data techniques, and I assume that they are being used in those other settings, wouldn't that give us essentially the same picture to achieve the stated goals that this is connected to? In other words, do we get to the same kind of conclusion by that mechanism? We also have the students registering as law students, and can't those questions be part of the registration?
So we looked at that closely, especially students that register with the State Bar. The registration happens very early on in their law school experience, and it's not something that is done annually. Also, for best practices collecting attrition data, it's recommended to reach out to the schools rather than students, because the attrition information would be difficult to obtain for students that are no longer engaged. So there are some challenges, and I recognize those challenges. I think it's something that we can review and identify some opportunities for recommendations for improved data collection, but also thinking about, for those smaller schools, what are some modifications that can be made, as well as maybe putting into more clearly outlined goals about how the data is going to be used. As you saw in the previous presentation, for those that were there, there's some valuable information on looking at demographics and how programs and policies impact those groups. And that information would be valuable to the schools when really thinking about how can services be approved improved. And that's really the target goal. How can we improve the opportunities for these underrepresented populations?
And Greg, might I share a couple of other logistical obstacles? The first one is that while students register at the start of their career, and we encourage them all to register within the first 90 days, there's not a penalty for doing so. And so different schools have different levels of coverage. And also, they generally will only interact with the state bar at the start of their career, and then when they're ready to register for a state bar exam. And so part of what we're looking at is the progression or lack thereof. And that would fundamentally change the relationship between the student and the state bar right now, having them check in only for this purpose. And so we think that we might miss critical progression data that we need if the state bar were to collect the information.
And I understand the desire to know things. We have it too. Maybe our particular desires are different. But I understand the desire to know on a more granular level. Questions of policy that come in get attached to that, though, when you ask those questions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as simple as, well, if we can get the data, we should get the data. There's a great deal more on our end, as Elizabeth has pointed out, and other operational things. For example, the state bar has a rule of not disclosing any group that's smaller than 11. Shouldn't the law schools have a rule that says we don't disclose any group smaller than 11? We have the same challenge you have in terms of the transparency the lack of transparency that our students expect from us. And asking for data at a very granular level that literally allows the state bar to track every individual from day one all the way through their law school career. A lot of our students are going to be very unhappy about that kind of information. And this is not a small matter for us. I mean, this is a very big matter for us. And there's questions of cost and other things that are still out there as well. But I think this one, to me, is the most essential. I don't see many of our students being at all pleased that this is going on.
So I think we need to circle back and go through these questions and provide, I think, some opportunity for explanation on method and approach. I would also say that the information on tracking over time, we are doing analysis on a year-by-year snapshot, and so we wouldn't be identifying an individual student. This data is in the aggregate, so there's some, I think, protections there. But again, your points are duly noted, and it's something that we need to further discuss and also provide some support and response to.
Just clarifying the aggregate point. What do you mean when you say aggregate? Because that probably would help me a lot.
Yeah, so a robust attrition analysis would mean that we would have a student in their first year of law school, identify them with a specific code or identification code, and then ask the school to provide information based on those codes or identifying numbers to track those students over the years that they are involved in that law school. And that's what we would say individualized data.
Yeah.
And we do not want that.
That's not what you want.
That's not what we do. No.
So what do we mean by aggregate?
So that means as a school, you would collect an information and give us a total count. So for instance, of those students who would respond to a sexual orientation question, they can say heterosexual, and then there are options for LGBTQI+. The school can say, I want to only provide you with heterosexual information, and then maybe a total for the LGBTQI. Again, so there's an opportunity to think about how you get totals as an aggregate count to share with the state bar versus individualized students with identifying information.
One last question on the cost side. It would be really useful if we were able to come to sort of a per student number for this. I mean, obviously, with no disrespect to our colleagues in the ABA world and their regulator, one of the reasons that education total cost of attendance $75,000 a year is that along the way, folks have had great ideas for things that they could do and said, well, the school could just do this. And all those things cost people money, and it ends up getting passed on to the students. And so our mission for these schools is very precisely not to be doing that sort of stuff. So let's, as we move forward with these ideas, be sure we understand exactly what the per student cost of doing this actually is for every school. And so I'd really request that somebody do that calculation. How much time is involved? What kind of staff person? What does that cost? What does it cost to do a survey? What's the reporting time? All the rest of that sort of stuff. It's kind of like the Federal Paperwork Reduction Act. At the bottom of the sheet, it tells you how much time this form takes to fill out. I'm always stunned, by the way, at how long those forms actually take to fill out. If you did all the things that they ask you to do, you'd do very little else a lot of the time. So I'd really like to see what that number is, so we can make that an explicit part of this conversation as well.
I just want to make sure that I understand implementation-wise as an individual school, because I think that's where I'm getting caught up on the privacy and the numbers. So in early 2020, you want to implement this. So I assume we may receive a form from the state bar, perhaps something on the website that we would go in and fill out a total number. So of my first year, who identified as male, black, whatever, and I would put in a total number. And so you will have the data for my school in 2020 for my first years, and I assume we'll start with first years, and then the following year we'll do first and seconds, and then first, second, third, so that we're following the attrition. The numbers for my incoming classes are so small that I could have 1 in a category, or I might have 3 in a category. That then raises privacy concerns for my school, and also a public records request for my school. And for those students are easily identifiable in the community in which they live. So what are the protections in place for that? Is it that we're going to use the same metric, which is if I have 11 or fewer in a particular category, I simply don't report in order to protect privacy, just like the state bar does? Are these not subject to public records requests, so I can be certain that these are private? What are the protections in place given the small numbers associated with each of our schools?
Hi, Jackie. I'm Caroline Holmes. I'm with the Office of General Counsel at the State Bar, and I have just come on board to assist admissions with different legal issues that come up. So I think I can speak to this issue a little bit. So the CPRA does require disclosure of public records, but it has a number of protections in place for certain types of records, and in particular records that implicate, serious privacy concerns, official information, and in the case of the State Bar, we have a specific protection for information that has the potential to identify applicants that's submitted by applicants themselves. That protection doesn't necessarily extend to information submitted by the law school to the State Bar, but at this point, if a CPRA request came into the State Bar requesting information that we felt, had serious privacy implications for your students, we would, to the best of our ability, protect that information from disclosure and assert all applicable privileges. And so, that's sort of how we would view the data coming in.
Well, maybe I'm not understanding this, but it sounded like you just said that if the applicants, the students, submit this information directly to the State Bar, it has more protection under the Public Rights Act than it would if we submit it as schools. Is that right? So
any information submitted by the applicant is protected by Business and Professions Code 6060.25. The Business and Professions Code section doesn't say that data submitted by the law schools is subject to the same section.
Right. Okay.
It may be that it's not really that well drafted, honestly, for the purposes of the State Bar and all the different types of missions and data that we need to be looking at. But notwithstanding the fact that that particular provision doesn't apply explicitly to the law school data, and we would take the position that the other privacy and official information protections from disclosure would apply. So those protections are subject to a balancing test, and it's done on more of a case-by-case basis, whereas the information submitted by applicants is protected from disclosure without the need for a balancing test. So there is a slightly stronger protection, but for the reasons Carolina pointed out, you know, we can't gather all of the same information from the students themselves as we can get from the law schools.
I guess I just want to join in on the concerns that have been raised already by Greg and Jackie, and we talked about these in other meetings, and also last week's meeting, and I'm expecting later today in our meeting, we're going to be talking again about the affordability aspect of our schools. And we were talking last week about trying not to add extra costs to these schools, which would then benefit the students and ultimately the public. So I'm thinking if there's better protection for information directly submitted by an applicant to the state bar should be doing this in the beginning. Maybe we as schools can add something more in our admissions process to make sure that registration with the state bar happens early. But if you really need us to give you the attrition information, then leave that with the schools. But gathering all this information in the beginning, to me, just seems to cause more problems for us than it would ever solve.
I do want to say, and I think everyone in the room would agree with this, what you're trying to achieve, I think every single person who is at a CALS or registered school believes in the pipeline, believes in diversifying the profession, and absolutely wants to make sure that they can do everything in their power to help their students succeed. So it's not the goal that you're trying to achieve that I think is the struggle that we're having. I know, especially in the state of California, but outside of it, race and ethnicity in law school has been politicized, and access to information from the state bar and other places regarding information related to attrition and success in law school and success on the bar has been sought after. I do worry deeply about the privacy of our students, given the small numbers of our schools and the small numbers in each group. And I would love, as much as I believe the state bar would go to the mat when it comes to trying to protect that information, it would be just a defense and it's not a guarantee. I wish we had some better safeguards applied to schools of particular sizes, assuming we're going forward with this, of classes of individuals or groups of individuals of particular sizes, to really safeguard privacy in a meaningful way, rather than we would absolutely defend against a Public Records Act, which, you know, it's great, but it doesn't guarantee that those numbers wouldn't be disclosed. So I know that I would feel better if there was the same privacy recognition of the state bar not disclosing of 11 and below to us. Our own student information is not disclosed to us publicly if it's 11 or below. It's not on the public record. Then we wouldn't have to disclose a number that was 11 or below. Is that not a safeguard that could be put in place?
I think one of the considerations is to perhaps follow the model that was followed for the law school studies, and that is once the information is received here by the state bar, we could come up with a mutual agreement that data would be destroyed and we would use the data in aggregate form, so that it would create that security measure in terms of securing the anonymity of that data.
That's definitely one of the options we could explore in terms of adding that additional safeguard. And you know, from our perspective, because we would be using the data and sort of releasing the data in the aggregate, the individualized data isn't so much, you know, at the school level, isn't really what we're interested in maintaining and you know, in that sense. So.
And an agreement like that overcomes the Public Records Act?
Yes, so for the data that we collected for the prior law school study, that data was collected pursuant to an agreement that basically said that the data would remain confidential and be destroyed, you know, after the data was aggregated.
Having microphone problems today. So I think one of the things that would be helpful for me, certainly, and maybe
think other state bar staff, is to get our arms a little bit around the cost issue. Because, right, we know that you are collecting certain data today. Understanding sort of how some of the schools do that and what kinds of changes we'd be looking at to, right, so because it's easy to look at this and say, well, you collect X number of categories today, we're asking you to collect X times 2 tomorrow. Geez, that doesn't seem that difficult. So having a sense from some of the schools about the case management systems, for lack of a better word, the student tracking systems that you have, to help us understand and get our arms around the cost issue, I think would be helpful for us.
And I think that part of the problem is that on the one hand, you could have a school with an entire Office of Institutional Research. On the other hand, you could have the registrar coming in on the weekends with a chart and a pencil and going through the list kind of thing. So I think the variety of management systems is going to be drastic.
Yeah, and I guess so, right, using the registrar example, right? So you got your registrar coming in on the weekend, going through the list. You know, they're just checking a few more boxes in this sort of my simplistic way of looking at it. It's I'm now checking not just for one of 5 race or ethnicity categories, but one of 7 race or ethnicity categories. That doesn't seem to be costly, and I don't know that we're asking, or I know that we're not asking you for sort of doing the analysis of the data. But it's the collecting and the aggregating of the data.
You don't want the registrar picking who's in what category, so you have to have a system at the front end that's collecting that information from the student originally. Right. I had the registrar in there on the weekend calculating the attrition after like the end of a semester or something. So I would have to ask others, do they collect that at the admission stage? Do they collect it at a different point? Or do they not collect it at all? And certainly all these categories probably aren't in anyone's database. But I'd be curious, Jay.
Just directly to your question, I think one of the difficulties is currently we're collecting data for iPads, most of us, and this is different from iPads. So this is going to require a change to our student information system if we have one. If we don't, then we have to probably change our entire workflow from admissions all the way through the registrar. And are there going to be more changes? Separate from that, you know, if we look at the third to last page, I presume this will become part of the annual report that we're going to be submitting every year. Is that correct? I would have difficulty in completing this because I always look at if I'm filling this out myself, how am I going to do this? If I have to establish a baseline, I'd have to create a spreadsheet, in essence, of every student by name with all these categories. Then I'm only reporting to you what you're asking for. Then the following year, which ones did not return. An interesting component that I've witnessed, because it's a small school, we only have about 200 students, these are self-identified categories that sometimes change. You know, it's not unusual that I've seen where I might have a Pakistani national come in originally, self-identify as Asian, but then by their second or third year, they self-identify as white. They switch categories. So we'd have to literally trace that person to see also are they changing their categories as they go through, much less gender or any other category. So I think there is a lot of complexity to it that it's not just doing one spreadsheet.
And Donna, this is Greg again. I just did very quick math. There are 800 boxes on the 4 pages that have, every single one of those is a decision by somebody in our school on what to report. Every one of the 800 boxes that you've given us on these tables. So it's not a simple matter. And every one of those, we have a responsibility to report accurately. We have to dig up every piece of data that goes into that box for every individual in every one of those 800 boxes. So that's the scope of what we're talking about here. It's not just checking another box and throwing them in the mix somewhere. It's not that simple, and it's custom.
Well, one thing I just wanted to add, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that, right, I mean, the only way to track students over time is either by name or student ID number, social security number, right? And so if you're saying that the schools collect that data but don't analyze that data, that might somewhat lessen the burden on the schools. But if it's the state bar who's actually analyzing that data, I think it's important to also not underestimate what the burden of that would be to the state bar, because you're talking about, checking thousands of student ID numbers or whatever it is across the schools, and tracking those longitudinally. I mean, I think that's the only way to track attrition on a student-by-student basis. That's why, like in the reporting that we have currently, I mean, there's a snapshot of how many students you have as 1Ls, 2Ls, 3Ls, 4Ls in each year over 5 years. It's not truly longitudinal, right? It's just sort of a, and if your enrollments are declining or increasing, it might misrepresent sort of what the actual attrition is. But I know a decision was made several years ago that was just, it was a compromise for administrative convenience because it is so hard to track students longitudinally. I mean, I'd love the greater accuracy of data, but I think we need to get a clearer picture of, what's involved on what fronts, data collection, analysis, who's doing it, what does that require, and this is not to push off, again, I think like everyone's echoing this is not to push off the importance and the benefit of the goal of this data, but it's complicated.
Can I add? So one thing, microphone problem. So one thing that we could do is go back and maybe streamline the tool. It doesn't differ that much just by looking at it. It doesn't differ so much from the now. What we have is tables with other variables, and they're very example. Just looking at the first grid on race and ethnicity breakdown, this table itself captures the law school year, gender, and then race. There should stop us from perhaps even capturing information on blending that so that what we have is a row dimension that also looks at, for example, the transfer in and transfer out as a separate variable. So it streamlines the data capturing into one row rather than having to create these breakdowns. I think that's one way that we could handle it. So perhaps one of the things we could do is go back and look at the data collection tools as a way of streamlining it. Because yes, if you look at the number of cells, it is overwhelming, but perhaps there's a way that we could refine the tool to streamline it. Because again, it deviates after this first table from our current data collection, but perhaps the more that we could gear it toward the way it looks right now might make this easier or more doable.
And to that note, we understand by no means is this an easy feat. I mean, the work that is being done now to provide the annual report, we understand takes a lot of investment of time and staff. And so one of our follow-up steps is to really understand how we can best implement this at the schools and what the barriers and challenges are. The good thing is that, we're not the first to do this. There are other institutions that have done this, so there are lessons learned that we can provide as insight to at least get the first step forward, and considering how we can best modify this practice during our first phase of implementation, and then look at as was brought up before, how the experience would vary across different schools based on their size.
And I'd just like to perhaps have you do it a little bit in a backwards design way. Maybe ask the schools what they collect now. Find out what the common variables are, and have that be as a starting place. And see how the collection goes, what it's like for the schools, what the barriers are, and whether or not the data that you're getting is helpful before expanding it to the size that may fit better for a large ABA institution than it does for small schools like ours. So I think there's probably a number of things that we gather already, or would find it much easier to gather, and that would have significance for the pipeline discussion, but does not include the variety of variables in here. Now, it's not going to match directly with what you want, but it still allows for a conversation about the pipeline. It still allows for our schools to have a conversation about what we can do to increase the retention of particular groups that we might be losing that we didn't know. Maybe even allow us to have as a CALS and a registered group conversations about how we can all do better, because we'll see the material in the aggregate. So rather than putting this collection on us, could you start with what we do collect and see if that is helpful.
So we did look at the annual report and what's currently collected. We haven't dug deep into each individual school and what they collect outside the annual report. I think that's a discussion I would need to follow up with Natalie on. One thing to note is that the research regarding retention practices for different underrepresented groups does require a regular review of the demographics as they're changing over time. And one thing we've learned with the MyStateBar profile is that the number of more than one race is going up. And we're also seeing that populations that identify as Middle Eastern, North African, that traditionally were underwhite, were very quick to identify in that group. And so in looking at how schools collect information, we want to make sure that we're in line with best practices. And we understand it takes time and it takes investment, and we're willing to provide the support and the assistance, but it is a conversation about best practices to really get to, I think what everyone agrees on is how to improve the opportunities.
Anybody else have additional comments?
Well, Jackie, I just want to mirror your comment. I mean, I certainly would engage in a conversation with the bar about what data is already collected and how that might be more effectively reported. For example, even in the present annual report, there might be categories that we are collecting that we could simply add to the present annual report that would give you, for example, concerns about differences between the African origin or Middle Eastern origin versus white groups. We might have that data. I don't actually think we do, but some might. And collecting and adding another column to the present reporting is a good way to begin, rather than, as Jackie has reflected, trying to go all the way to another spot with all of us right off the bat. I'm certainly willing to engage in that conversation, and I'll echo everybody else's comments about how important and useful the information is. But everything has such a cost to it, and it's a greater cost than we often give it credit for. So, I don't want to sit, and it's probably end up being me. There's 315 cells on that one page, and I don't want to sit there all weekend verifying the data for 315 cells. That doesn't sound like fun to me, and I'm the one who has to sign it. So,
Jay?
And again, I just want to make sure to echo the same thought that I think all of us from the CALS registered schools are about opportunity mission. I think it is a good project. I think that's what we want to know so we can become better schools. I think there is the cost issue, but that's variable from school to school, of course. I think the privacy issue is probably the paramount issue. And as an example, I would be concerned, as one of the larger CALs with 200 students, how many people am I going to have in each category? And will they be identifiable? And if I don't have faith in that protection, normally we collect this on our admissions side as they're registering. I'm sure I'll put a notation, with these boxes that you're selecting, although we'll attempt to protect your information, we cannot guarantee that protection. Then that'll force more people to decline to state. And might have every student decline to state, and that defeats the entire purpose. So I'm just trying to be more the critical friend of, how can we make it work while still protecting privacy?
And just so I'm clear, Caroline, that when the agreement was made as to the law school performance study, it was a particular study that was set apart from anything else that the State Bar was doing. At this point, we're talking about embedding this information within an annual report. So is it possible for us to carve out and say the annual report is subject to a public records request, except for this data over here because it's under a separate agreement?
So, I think that the types of solutions that we're talking about right now would have to be tailored to the specifics of the situation. So that was just sort of an example of how, we didn't retain data at the individual level because we were really interested in the aggregate data. So here, it could take the form of more like a document retention policy with respect to this information and how are we maintaining it? How long are we maintaining it? Just to add that extra safeguard. But to echo, I think the court, through the pendency of the Sander litigation with the State Bar, really made clear that, they think that data that is under 11 students, that has a potential to identify people, is subject to really strong privacy interests. And so even though, you know, it's not clear exactly which exemption is going to apply and exactly how it's all going to shake out, I mean, we have a really strong basis for concluding that this isn't the type of information that would be subject to disclosure. And that's certainly, you know, our sort of how we're approaching this discussion. So.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. All right. Thank you, and thank you for listening. I know that some of these concerns were brought to your attention before, and I appreciate you allowing us to express them again. And again, I think everyone believes that what the Access and Inclusion Committee is trying to achieve is a worthy goal, and to the extent that we can participate in a way that fits with our school's resources and protects our students' privacy, I think we all want to be a part of that. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I know we're having trouble accessing the agenda, but what we're going to be doing now is actually having a Groundhog Day moment where we will be circling back to the conversation that we started last Friday. I know most of you probably sat through the 5-hour webinar to catch up on where we were, but just in case some of you were not able to do that, we are going to reprise some of that discussion to catch up. And is there a...
Yeah, so
Okay.
we're bringing that up right now.
So just to catch people up and frame what it is we're doing, we have the opportunity to provide guidance to the Committee of Bar Examiners in what is really a wholesale look at the rules and guidelines that govern accredited schools. So it is a really exciting opportunity for us to take a look at those rules and guidelines and to make sure that they fit with kind of a particular mission, a set of values, that they reflect best practices, and an opportunity to really, I think, holistically look at the rules and guidelines, because it seems like they may have been created over time with new guidelines being stuck in as it seemed appropriate, but not really done through a holistic view. So this is just a really wonderful opportunity. There's really 3 phases to this process. And the first phase is the one that we spent some time talking about last week, which was really what would be the guiding mission, the guiding values, the guiding principles that would kind of have the overview for the rules and guidelines. And then the next phase would be, once we've identified that mission, once we've identified those core values, to look at the rules and guidelines to see, are they consistent with those mission and goals, and are they consistent with best practices? What needs to be amended? What should we keep? What should we add? And then next is really to move to that deemed accredited status. Once we understand what those new rules and guidelines are, how does that work for deemed accredited status? What are the overlaps between other accrediting agencies and the state bar rules and guidelines, and what's that new status look like? So last week we really spent a lot of time, pretty much the entire 4 hours, talking about the idea of a mission, about core values. And the first thing we did was really to take a look at other accrediting agencies' missions and values. And the State Bar very helpfully had created a grid in which they identified a number of accrediting agencies. And I think do people have the hard copy in the public space as well, or?
Yeah, so the members
Yeah,
do, and
okay.
I'll ask Michael to distribute it to those members of the public who are interested. This is also published on the State Bar's website, attached to the agenda for those watching via webcast.
Thank you. So what we did is we really took a close look at the accrediting agency's missions, values and goals, and identified some of the phrases or words or ideas that jumped out at us from other accrediting agencies, and kind of thought about whether or not they were good fits for who we were or who we thought the state bar as an accrediting agency, what we wanted to see from them. We then went and kind of talked about our own kind of mission and values through the lens of some phrases and words that the state bar had compiled. And we're going to do that as well today, and you can see that up on the screen. But before we do that, after the conversation at last week's meeting, we made some suggestions to the state bar staff. It would be interesting to see this accrediting agency's mission or this accrediting agency's values, and they actually added some new accrediting agencies to this list and gave us an opportunity to look at them again. And I know that different members of CS BARs kind of took a look at a particular accrediting agency, and we'll just go through the same exercise we did last time, which is to say, okay, with that new accrediting agency, what were the ideas or words that kind of jumped out as ones that we might want to add to the list? At the last meeting, we kind of put a bunch of ideas and concepts and words in a parking lot as ideas that we wanted to return to when we started to frame our own mission and our own values. And so why don't I start with the committee, and then we'll open it up for public comment and have other people have the opportunity to talk about what jumped out at them in terms of guiding principles and mission. And so Jay, you took a look at our new list,
For the Northwest Commission?
the Northwest Commission on Colleges and Universities. Great. So what jumped out at you from that particular?
Well, interesting, they only have values. Yeah, no goals, no vision, no mission. I thought that was interesting. But again, I thought that's how we should start as well, with the values. I think some things popped out to foster excellence. Again, I think that's something important. Also, the assessing educational quality. Again, to me, that's just the culture of evidence we've been discussing over and over again. Again, assessing data, being data guided, not driven specifically. Encourage institutional improvement through self-study. Again, that self-reflection, again, what is unique to the institution and self-defining. I thought the third paragraph was interesting. Ensure the educational community, the general public, and other organizations. So I think it's our consumer protection. And I was thinking, the consumer protection I have a pushback on emotionally every time I hear that word. It comes across negatively to me. I think, however, if we just change it to for the public good, I think that's what we're really trying to say, is what is for the public good, and that could be defined differently within each institution, whether it's accessibility versus the negative aspect I hear when I think consumer protection. Define an appropriate educational objectives, again, self-defined for the institution. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. You know, what's going to work for an online school might not work for a brick and mortar school. So I think it's important that each school is able to define and identify its own objectives, and specifically also have to be reasonable. Also, they're substantially accomplishing them. Again, not perfection, but they're continuing to improve. So those are my takeaways, at least from the Northwest Commission.
All right. Thank you, Jay. Any comments on what Jay had to offer from that particular commission from others? Okay. And Marty, you did the Middle State Higher Education Corporation?
Yeah. So it has mission as well as values. And it's fairly similar because they're all pretty high level in general. It talks about assuring students and the public the educational quality of higher education. So sort of, you know, staying ambiguous about who's being protected and kind of framing it in a positive light, like Jay mentioned. And similarly, talks about rigorous application of standards within the context of institutional mission. So trying to balance, you know, we want everyone to adhere to A, B, and C, but recognizing that different schools have different reasons for being, different ways of getting there, and they want to try and reflect that. Those are the two things that jumped out at me. Everything else was kind of just, you know, what you'd expect.
Yeah. Okay. Any follow up on Marty's Middle States Higher Education? Okay. The Northwest Commission of Colleges and Universities, oh, we just did that one. The Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, SACS.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I think very similar, obviously, to the others because these are regionals. They do have an interesting focus on educational quality and improving the effectiveness of a member institution through integrity and continuous quality improvement. Now, of course, there's an emphasis on peer review and self-regulation, which I think is an interesting concept that we all spend a little time talking about, how that frames in this setting. And then student learning outcomes, transparency, very similar items that are important to them. I thought they had a rather grandiose mission to serve the premier model for shaping and ensuring the quality of higher education throughout the world. There are no small stakes in SACS.
It's a vision. Well, and what I found interesting is when you look at the words in their value statement, they're very much, I think, all the words that at least were identified last week and were a part of our conversation last week as well. I think they're all in the parking lot at this point. So, Kareem, you did the Higher Learning Commission?
Yes, I did. So one of the things is their mission is serving the common good by assuring and advancing the quality of higher learning. One of the interesting things about this organization is that they have an incentive to be really in good relations with the federal government. And so they call it the triad, where they work with the federal government, the state, and themselves as a regional accreditation agency. And so some of the values that they have is a focus on student learning. We discussed in one of the other institutions that they do have peer review, which was a big thing that we liked. Education as a public purpose, education for a diverse, technological, globally connected world, and in a culture of continuous improvement. I know that's come up in some other institutions. And then evidence-based institutional learning and self-presentation, integrity, transparency, and ethical behavior of practice. And their goals is an acronym. It's VISTA. So that stands for Value to Members, Innovation, Student Success, Thought Leadership, and Advocacy. And another unique part of this organization is that they have 4 different types of accreditations that each have a very prescribed criteria on how a school could be accredited.
And are you guys are you HLC, Greg, or were you at some point?
So I have 4 or 5 different accreditors I've had something to do with.
Yeah.
So initial accreditation was DETC with Concord when it first came along.
Yeah.
Then WASC in several different institutions here. Also on the team that had Kaplan University initially accredited by the HLC, was one of the very first fully online universities accredited by a regional accreditor. And then, of course, good familiar with the bar, the ABA, as well as California Bar. So,
right, okay.
So a lot of things.
All right. And then, Brian, you did the American Association of Colleges of Nursing.
I did. Full disclosure, I've been married to a nurse for over 40 years, and I'm sure she'd agree with every one of these things that they say. The AACN is the voice for academic nursing according to its mission and purpose statement, and it serves as the catalyst for excellence and innovation in nursing education, research, and practice. So all aspects of it. And their vision statement says, nurses are transforming healthcare and improving health. And I can tell you from third-hand experience that's true. I did see in their goals a list of things we talked about last week. Leadership, innovation, diversity and inclusion, and integrity. They seem to be pretty much common denominators among almost every accrediting agency. I think we can learn a lot from that.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I took a look at NEASC, and I did work for an institution that was NEASC accredited, and they have a very unique approach to their, I think, values and goals. And so it's I think one of the things that jump out that I appreciate about NEASC is it was focused on the unique aspect of each institution, and it embedded that in its goals and values. they are dedicated to school improvement and growth while honoring the unique culture and context of each institution we support. And I know that came up last week as something that we recognized. All of our schools are different. We don't necessarily want to become homogenized. We want to recognize and celebrate the different ways in which we provide pathways to legal education and pathways to the legal profession at our schools. So I know that's important. They have that in their goals as well, encourages the pursuit of a unique mission in distinctive circumstances by each member. So again, focusing on that idea of not homogenized education, but unique. They also recognize, and this came up in a couple of other accreditors, if you take a look, recognize resource limitations of schools. We talked very explicitly last week, and we will again, about that idea of affordability being core to the Cal and registered schools, and then how can that play out in the context of our accrediting agency. And here they say at their final goal, assist member schools in navigating accreditation in a context often dictated by federal, state, or local mandates and by limited means. So kind of recognizing the burden really from multiple places, not just the NEASC as an accrediting agency, but from multiple places, and how that kind of connects with resources at particular schools. And they had this same idea about peer review and self-reflection that we found in many of the accrediting agencies. Those were the new ones that we kind of identified. But before we jump, and Greg, you didn't have the benefit of being here last week to kind of go through. So I did want to give you the opportunity. We went through each of them individually and kind of talked about them. But anything based on your experience that you, from other accrediting agencies, that you think was positive, good, a value, or a mission that you would want us to consider and put in our parking lot?
Well, I don't think there's anything new. I would emphasize the peer review aspect of it, because I think the peer learning that goes on during that process is critical. Certainly that's an element of our process today. I think it could perhaps be a larger element of our process than it is now. I think it's really important also to have a leveled blend of things that are very specific, that a school can put a metric on, know exactly where they belong, but then certainly not ignore sort of the global self-improvement innovation that individual schools may have. And I think, unfortunately, the tendency is to create when you get too specific, is you craft rules that really stamp down innovation and variation. And as long as those innovations and variations serve the public and deliver the education, we should embrace those. We should hope for those things. So I think that all the accreditors have gone through a period of great change, certainly since the Obama administration, in their approach to the way they look at accreditation. And it has become very data-driven today, but fortunately the data is really data internal to the institution, according to the way the institution has defined its objectives, its learning outcomes, and so on, and its measures of success. So I think that's a really important piece of what we're talking about here as we think about moving away from fairly detailed prescriptive rules that look a lot like somebody had a great idea over the years, as I was saying earlier. And it became a collection of great ideas that were great ideas at one point, but perhaps not so much anymore. To rather the flexibility for institutions to define within their mission, their audience, the people they serve, those metrics that are important to their continuous improvement, properly collect data, use the data for further decision making in respect to those objectives, and demonstrate that continuous cycle of improvement. That kind of process, where it is more at the definition of the institution than it is driven by a set of rigid standards by the accreditor, I think would benefit all of us. I think it would benefit the public greatly, because you'd have that diversity, you'd also have it established, you'd be able to prove the institution is doing the things it needs to do to protect the public. And if, after all, regional accreditation is the sort of the gateway to federal funding of education, then certainly that level of process ought to be appropriate for this kind of accreditation process as well, where that particularly big hammer isn't attached to it.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Greg. And I'll just point to a couple of the accrediting agencies that speak to some of what Greg's talking about, especially about creativity and innovation, which we did identify as something that we wanted to see if we could incorporate, whether it's in the values or the mission, however it gets put. So people want to look at COCA, their goals specifically identify that they foster continuous quality improvement of education by encouraging innovation and creativity. Is one of the accreditors who put innovation and creativity directly into their goals. You also have the AACSB that says foster engagement, accelerate innovation. So they had as their mission that concept. And I think in their values, we were also drawn to the idea of quality, diversity, inclusion, ethics, social responsibility as things that we thought were really something that resonated with the group last week as well. And then I know that one of the things that I liked from NAAB last week is in their mission and purpose, that last phrase where it says allows institutions with varying resources and circumstances to evolve according to their individual needs. So really, again, speaks to that idea that each of our schools are different, that we bring different public good, to go back to Jay's things, in different ways, and to create an accreditation system that allows for the evolution of schools based on their resources, unique circumstances, and as you said, Greg, the goals that they've identified for themselves in terms of improvement and engagement, et cetera. So did anyone on the committee want to follow up or add anything about the accrediting agencies that we have before us before I open it up to public comment? Anything else? Okay. All right. So welcome the public's thoughts about the mission and goals, values, things that jump out that you think it's important that the State Bar as an accrediting agency have as guideposts. Are you going to disappoint me, Elizabeth? Anyone want to offer some insights? Yeah, George.
George, we need your, I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to look at other accreditors to get a sense of what they do and how they do it. But what I would, counsel or provide some advice is don't lose sight of the historical benefits that the committee has for decades offered in terms of affordable, accessible legal education. And so, like, don't throw the entire baby out with the bathwater would be my first comment. And recognize that, making the committee WASC light, for instance, is not necessarily a better thing. I think, honestly and frankly, those who, I think were very misinformed or uninformed, who thought that, outsourcing the accreditation function, the entire accreditation function of the committee, was somehow a good idea and would somehow raise the bar. I think they had a complete misunderstanding or were uninformed as to what the real effect of that would be. So, it's always good to look and assess what has worked and what would work better, but don't lose sight of where the committee is and has been, and improve on that. And there's different ways to do it, but just cloning or becoming, like I say, WASC light isn't necessarily, in my opinion, a better way to go.
Thank you, George. I think you need to turn it on.
Ira Spiro, Dean of People's College of Law. I would love it if something could be added as a goal of accreditation, to take into account the financial limitations of some of such as schools have, who would be applying for accreditation. Our budget at our school is about $120,000 a year, and accreditation would be a big chunk of that, the expenses if we were to become.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Ira. Yeah.
Hi, is this still on? I'm Lisa Hutton. This is where we're kind of going right now
It
from last
is.
week?
Okay.
I
It's
just
part
saw
of the
that.
parking lot.
So I think you covered a ton. What I don't see up there is quality.
Thank you.
So I would ask that, while I think the main mission is exactly as I believe George mentioned, which is accessibility, right, to those that wouldn't otherwise be able to obtain a legal education, it's clearly, in my opinion, should be our primary mission and vision, but quality should remain and be forefront.
Thank you, Lisa. Other.
Hello, I'm Jessica Park from Abraham Lincoln University, the Vice President and the Dean of the School of Law there. I'm very excited about the look that the committee is taking at the mission and values of accreditation agencies, and I just wanted to add a public comment. I am the chair of the Standards Committee at the Distance Education Accrediting Commission this year, and started this summer. I think that's a great position to look at distance education accreditation, which is relevant to my school, which is a fully online law school. Some things I wanted to let the committee know, and this was not pre-prepared, but really looking at some of the live issues. I think it's very important when you're benchmarking and looking towards your mission and values to think about what makes you unique, think about what you uniquely deliver and who you're trying to serve. And I would agree with the comment that there is a unique mission here, just given, even with the Distance Education Accrediting Commission, where there's a great body of schools that come together and discuss institutional improvement along online education lines. There is a lot of respect for entities like the Committee of Bar Examiners to be the ones that look into their mission of what makes a quality legal education that's accessible and affordable in California. And I just encourage the committee to not lose sight of that. And as you're framing your mission, it's very easy. I've experienced it at my institution to go very high level. We all know that we have very high aspirational goals of where to be. But usually the best planning strategically is to point to where you can bring your overall organization. That is realistic to you, that is realistic to the history of who you're serving. So I did want to comment on that. The other thing I wanted to comment on, and it's a little bit floating in the air but should be more firm in November, and I wanted to let this committee know, is that there is negotiated rulemaking going out from the Office of Post-Secondary Education, Department of Education. ALU participated in public comments this summer, but it might be something of interest to this committee because it's talking a lot about where they may want recognition of accrediting agencies to go. A lot of that focus is, again, more on evidence-based decisions, focus on institutional improvement, and a number of other changes. So I wanted to give that input as someone who works and refines standards at an accrediting commission with a lot of great volunteers. It's definitely, you know, the chair helps organize and coordinate a lot of great input, but doesn't do the work alone. It's really the strength of the whole organization. I want to encourage you to know that even as you're looking back and seeing the snapshot of where these agencies are, they're getting a lot of directives and vision from the Department of Education because that's a source of their recognition. Also with the Council for Higher Education with CHIA, that's another source as well. But for this entity, you do have more freedom based on where you're recognized. So definitely as you look at these, I think look at them for best practices, but you may not be in the same position as an agency that needs to meet these for their recognition this fall and winter. So I hope that's helpful to you.
It is. Thank you so much. Any other public comments before we move forward?
I waited. Okay, so for our chart, a couple of things that from my notes we stressed last time. And Greg mentioned adding peer review as an important variable that we consider, but also we spent a fair amount of time talking about the difference between assessment and voluntary assessment. And I thought that that was an important conversation to continue. And then community driven as an important mission value. And then ethics and ethical practice, having that be something that is an important value to consider as well. And stressing that we are serving the public, the profession, and the community. And there, I bring that up again, even though it slightly blurs into community, but we spent a lot of time on that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And yeah, I think what the chart that you're seeing right now reflects the start of a list that the state bar staff kind of generated, and then the addition of some words and phrases that came up last week as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Natalie, you didn't eliminate anything because you wanted to leave everything as it was. So even if, for example, we spent some time talking about bar exam preparation perhaps being not part of a mission or goal, but rather something that might show up in a guideline if necessary. But Natalie appropriately didn't want to take it off until we'd had the full discussion. And I think you would also say that it's not an inclusive list of every word or phrase that we kind of identified last week.
Thanks, Jackie. Yes, it would be helpful to know that a number of other ideas were discussed that might be appropriate for rules or guidelines, and those were cataloged and tagged as to these various values. So that information was captured and will be a part of the discussion as the values coalesce.
Again, there is a 5-hour webinar that you're welcome to watch. Contains it all. So I thought what we'd move forward, because again, not everyone not all the members were able to be here last week, and not all the members of the public who are here today were able to be a part of the conversation that we at least launched regarding some of these concepts. So I did want to circle back both to what started on the list as well as what was added to the list, and continue the conversation. As I'm thinking about kind of next steps in this, I really want to challenge CS BARS to have an identified mission and set of values by the start of 2020, so that we can provide to the Committee of Bar Examiners at least our thoughts on what an appropriate mission would be and what an appropriate set of values would be for the accrediting agents, for the State Bar as the accrediting agency. Because if the Committee of Bar Examiners accepts and believes that that is a good starting place, it really gives us the entire 2020 to dive in and do that wholesale look at the guidelines. So we have really one more meeting scheduled for this year in December, and is the CBE going to be voting on its new schedule for next year soon? It's not yet on the website.
I believe that schedule is in process and it may actually be posted tomorrow.
Okay, great. And so the assumption would be that we would have CS BAR's meeting attached to those.
The CS BARs would not be constrained to that schedule, but that would be a reasonable starting point. Sure. That seems to be the way to get the best progress.
Right, because obviously I think it's difficult to do drafting in this kind of setting, so we would be doing a lot of work in between and then bringing those drafts so that others have the opportunity to be engaged in the process, offer comments and feedback as we move forward. The goal today is really to kind of narrow down that idea of what would we want the mission of the State Bar to be as it relates to accrediting the Cal accredited law schools. What are those values that we think are so core that we want to make sure they're expressed publicly and really guide the revision of the rules and guidelines, guide the implementation of the rules and guidelines, guide the interpretation of the rules and guidelines, because this is really the core starting place. So it's really key that we feel confident that we have expressed and are guiding or providing our guidance to the CBE in the clearest form. So again, want to invite conversation about what is up there as different words and phrases that we think are so central and important that we want to be a part of it, or ones that we're not completely comfortable with or need to have better definition. And one of them that came out last week that all of us were kind of confused about is, what does consumer protection mean in the guise of an accrediting agency? Who is the consumer? And what does that mean? And Jay, you raised today maybe operating for the public good is a better way to talk about it. But I did want to bring consumer protection back to the table, in part because it is a part of the State Bar mission. And so what does that mean as it relates down to the Committee of Bar Examiners being an accrediting agency? And does consumer protection or some iteration of it fit within the accrediting mission?
Okay, I'll take a swing at that. This is Greg. Consumer protection is one piece of the accrediting mission, certainly. I think that the accrediting mission is much more holistic than just that. And obviously, in this context, the accrediting mission must, in some fashion, reflect the mission of the State Bar, which is not just public protection, but it's also access and affordability and other things that you all probably spend a great deal of time talking about. So, which, by the way, reminds me to say, just stop me if I'm repeating something someone else already said at length, last week, since I apologize I wasn't able to be there. So I think, I'm drawn a little bit to the Middle States Commission mission statement as kind of a starting point of conversation, because it involves a number of the things that we've talked about, and I would certainly add affordability and access to legal services and access to legal education and some of our other parking lot words to that list. But it has the concept of innovation and peer review and rigorous review and self-improvement for the institution. Jackie, I know I'm jumping ahead on your question a little bit because you're asking about what we mean by consumer protection, but I think it's a bundle of things. Mm-hmm. It's a bundle of rights and responsibilities. It goes well beyond, just preventing the possibility that somebody who isn't so great at, administrative law gets, through to the bar exam. It's a lot different than that. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to look at all these things as a part of the overall picture even when we look at that part of the State Bar's mission. It's kind of like on a test, the validity of an exam is a combination of validity, reliability, where's the cut score, because an exam might be a great exam at this cut score and a really bad exam at this cut score. I'm not saying anything about any particular exam at the moment, but in fact, the validity of a concept depends on its parts. And all those parts have to line up appropriately for the concept to have that validity. And that's what I'm drawing on as I kind of ask us to take a very holistic look at it. So we might draw some things out of the State Bar mission. I certainly think there's some things from here. There's certainly concepts on our parking lot to reach the mission or the purpose of accreditation for the bar. So I don't know, maybe we could draft a little if we get excited about that.
Well, and I just want to see if I've got the phrase that jumped out at you, and I think it's assure students and the public of the educational quality of higher education.
Right.
So
Exactly.
because one of the conversations we were having last week was both who's the consumer and what are they being protected from? Is it the student being protected from an educational product that isn't quality, or did it have anything to do with the graduate and the public as it relates to potential future clients? And you could certainly see the two linked, but not necessarily.
Sure, and for example, a poor quality program could have great retention rates. Could easily. And so the data would all look great.
Yeah.
But the quality wouldn't necessarily be assured, and vice versa, right? A very high quality program, I'll use mine as an example. We lose a lot of people because they can't keep up. And so you can't judge an institution just on retention and say that therefore that's not serving the public or they're doing something wrong if in fact the institution views itself as highly rigorous and a program that doesn't graduate the majority of their students might be the best program out there in terms of educational quality. So I think we've got to balance a lot of different factors here, and you know that it's easy to get kind of hung up on the notion that, well, if they start, they should graduate, to our conversation earlier. That's not necessarily so, certainly not in an access environment. So we've got a lot of things to make sure that are part of that, and I think that phrase does capture it really well.
So you would think it would make good sense to have one of the missions, part of the mission statement for the State Bar of California Committee of Bar Examiners, to say something along the lines of assure students and the public of the educational quality of legal education in this case.
That's right.
And that it captures that quality piece that was so important as part of the public comments. It kind of connects the protection to students and the public, but as it relates to the quality of the education, not necessarily performance on the bar exam, but that I think is something that is still under discussion or potential clients in the future.
Sure, and I think obviously we can look at a lot of metrics for measuring educational quality. Pass rates on the bar exam are clearly a metric, but they cannot be the main metric. And, you know, again, without getting into the bar exam discussion itself, we have plenty of reason to doubt that our bar exam today is a particularly good measurement. So there's plenty of reason to not make that the principal thing that measures our schools. Certainly it's a data point, and it's a relevant data point, but it's as an example of going too far in any one of these directions,
Right.
it certainly would.
And I also, just for purposes of discussion, want to distinguish things that we might identify as part of the core mission versus values that we might list as important, but not necessarily part of the mission statement. And I raise that because we talked a lot last time about diversity, equity, inclusion, which might be great values, whereas accessible and affordable might be something. Promoting an accessible and affordable quality legal education might be more mission, but that accessible would be captured in what that might mean is captured in that, in part in that diversity, equity, and inclusion value that we have. So I know accessible and affordable were also key concepts that guide the CALs, and it seems as if the State Bar finds value in that as well, that the mission of the accrediting agency would be to help promote an accessible, affordable legal education for those who are seeking it in California. Okay. So we can put any thoughts about either that phrase from the Middle States or the idea of including an accessible and affordable education in the mission itself?
Well, again, as I said earlier, here I am again. It's part of the State Bar mission statement. So to the extent that this mission statement should reflect that, accessibility of legal education is part of accessibility to legal services. There's no question of that. So I think those two are quite in parallel, and it certainly would include that concept.
Yeah,
and affordability is a critical component of accessibility.
Right, and we talked about that last time, unlinking it. We think about affordability through the lens of tuition, but as it relates to the state bar as an accrediting agency, recognizing the burden, as we talked about earlier today, that certain regulatory requirements, fees, place on schools that then get passed on to students and result in an increase. Other, Brian, you and then Jay?
Well, I was just only going to say that since I started in this role a year or so ago, the first words I think that were told to me by other deans was that these are called opportunity schools. And I'd kind of like to see that fleshed out a little bit more. Maybe put that in our mission statement as to what we mean by that. And I have a question just for process sake. Are you hoping, Jackie, today to come up with a draft of a statement? Is that what we're trying to do, or?
Well, I think throwing together things that we might want will make it easier. I don't know whether we would be successful in that, but sure, kind of fleshing out more phrases than complete, unless you've got a paragraph you want to throw
No,
out
I
there.
don't. I've got a whole
All right,
page
fine.
of all the stuff we talked about last week that much of which is contained in each other. I mean,
Yeah.
but I haven't set pen to paper to try to come up with a statement yet.
Okay, all right, we'll give you time to do that, because I hear a volunteer in that. But opportunity as opposed to accessible.
Well, I mean, whatever it means. I mean, I know what I tell people when I tell them this is an opportunity school. I tell them that it's an opportunity for people who can't go to some other school for one reason or another. Either their matrix of LSAT or GPA don't work, or they don't have the time to take off from work, or they live too far away, whatever it is. But that's what I tell people opportunity means. We give you the chance to be here, and you have to do the work to stay here, as Greg is saying. You know, and I think it was mentioned yesterday or last week by Amy, I believe, that, you know, the state bar already has done a lot to accommodate those two, you know, push me, pull you issues. You've got people that you're letting into a law school. You have to recognize you're not going to be able to keep them all. You're hoping that the ones you let in are going to make it, but you know that not all of them will. And they compromised on that with a 40% bar pass rate. So, and what Mr. Leal said, I think is worth keeping in our minds. And there's been a lot of work done over the years on these rules and guidelines, most of which I was fine with. And I liked the way they compromised the stresses between bringing people in, keeping it affordable, and understanding a lot of people aren't going to make it. So I'm not sure exactly how you know, shorten, like when I have a whole page into a mission statement that's 2 or 3 sentences. I don't know yet how you do that. I am willing to work on it for you, and probably not by the end of today, though.
All right, thank you, Brian. Yeah. Jade?
Sure, just going back to the question on consumer protection. Again, I think my aversion to it is it's more of a negative statement. And again, if we're looking at values, you know, what is the guide star for the CalBar, the CBE as an accreditor? I think, again, I prefer something for the public good, pro bono. I think they're the same idea, just flip sides of the coin. But I think when I hear consumer protection, I'm thinking selling widgets. I'm looking at grade letters at a restaurant ABC versus I think we're institutions of higher learning. So even if a student doesn't complete the program or they don't pass the bar, I believe we're still making the public better. We're educating the populace, which hopefully improves our entire society. So I think if we look through the guiding principle of does this rule, does this guideline, does this mission make our society better?
Do you, just so I can I totally understand your consumer protection phrase. Do you like the assure students and the public of the educational quality of legal education? Or do you think that veers too much into that rating system?
I think it's just a distinction. Are we discussing values or mission and vision? I think if it's values, it's something more simple, just north. To me, north is this for the public good? And then the mission might be that we achieve the public good by preserving the integrity of education.
Okay. Thank you. Marty, anything to add on the consumer good protection concept or public good?
No, because I don't know if I have anything to add that hasn't already been said. Also, I think for me at least, at a certain point, I got to see a sentence or a paragraph and start picking it apart. Even though we can talk about words in isolation, once I see it in context,
Right.
then I can say, okay, I like the way it reads, I'm bothered by this.
Right.
So at this point, sort of in the abstract, I don't really have anything else to add.
No, and I think that's true. So we'll be ready to pick apart Brian's paragraph probably next time he comes. Something to look forward to.
And something else I would encourage to think about is that a deliverable might be a combination of things. It might be a series of values that are quick and bulleted, and then if needed, some sort of explanatory type of statement. And I kind of am already hearing both levels saying, here are my bulleted, concise guiding values, and here's what they mean.
Yeah, Donna.
I really like the sort of way the conversation was going earlier as we were talking about consumer protection or quality of education, having sort of two different audiences, the students who are attending the schools, and that, right, I keep going back to ultimately the mission and the values are going to be what guides the standards and the guidelines, the regulations that the committee ultimately recommends, right? Everything that we put in place should only be put in place if, and this is the visual I keep doing with this, ties back. If it ties back to the mission, that's the only reason it exists. And so as I think about consumer protection, and I think Greg summed it up well, I think about things like, under the current rules, the disclosures that we have. So the students have the information they need to make the right decision for them. And so for them, bar passage might be more or less important, right? For them, the ability to attend at night or online may be more or less important. And so sort of having all of the right disclosures to tell them what kind of education they're getting. And then for the public, making sure that we are graduating students who have the ethical boundaries that they need, who are able to sort of practice effectively in the world. So I want us to make sure, sort of, however we term that, it's, that we keep both of those audiences in mind, the students and the public, who hopefully some of those students will serve as their attorneys.
Thank you, Donna. Yeah. And I think, Marty, you're right. It's difficult to talk about a mission in isolation. And I'm wondering if it would be more helpful to kind of identify core values, because that's more of a bulleted list. And it gives us an opportunity to kind of tick off things that we think are core to this accrediting agency's work. And then the mission is more of a drafting thing that we can work on outside. Do people feel comfortable moving in that direction? Yeah. And before we do, I just want to ask, is there any public comment? Yeah. So no, okay. No, just.
Let me just toss one. Mitch Winnick, Monterey College of Law. Something that we do see other accreditors do that I would like to see this body consider. Advocacy and awareness for those who are accredited and have made this standard. Certainly the ABA advocates for the brand of being an ABA accredited school. You go through the gristmill of reaching accreditation, and then it means something. And so the organization itself defends the brand, creates the brand, promotes the brand, so it gives value to membership. So I'm not exactly, it doesn't really fit in this category of things, but I think that would be an addition to where it would bring value to it. So where the state bar, you've heard me say it many times before, is proud of the role that it plays in being the accreditor and providing all of these things on the list, and then shifts to an advocacy, promotion, and awareness, so that there's a distinction between those who've made it as accredited and those that haven't. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, and thanks, Mitch. And there's just a tiny bit of what you're saying in the NEASC values, promoting public recognition of the challenges that accredited institutions face, and elucidates the value of accreditation for the public, legislative bodies, et cetera. So it's a little bit of that in there, but yeah, great. And Ira, did you stand, and then Drew? Oh, okay.
Just a quick note. One quick note, this idea of being opportunity schools, as Dean Portell mentioned, is of course critical, is it's added, and I don't mean to sound trite, but I always looked at the guidelines and the committee's role to provide a meaningful opportunity for individuals in a community to get a quality legal education and have, again, a meaningful opportunity to pass the bar exam. Meaningful, in my mind, was aspirational, and it gave some insight, I think, into how the guidelines ought to be enforced and aspired to. So, and you could add metrics to meaningful in that sense, because it's one thing to say a school provides opportunity, but if, for instance, no one's passing the bar exam or first year exam, then you have to question whether or not it's a meaningful opportunity. So I hope that might help.
Thank you, George.
Can I be here? Assure them whether it's true or not, but so that's not, that really, it's open to that interpretation. And you could put assure the public in front of every one of these things. So I think that should go down.
Thanks, Ira. So you would support promote over the accrediting agency assuring anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. So I think this is probably duplicative of what you just said, Jackie, about going to core values. But while a bunch of people were talking, I thought about what are the main core values that I would think that we would want as an accrediting body, and mine were quality, ethics, and accessibility. So here's your couple sentences to pick apart if we want to go down that road. But I think the mission is to protect the public good by ensuring quality, ethical, and accessible legal programs. So I don't think you're assuring the public of the outcome of the programs, the graduates, right? I think you're assuring the public that the accrediting body has quality, ethical, and accessibility standards by which they judge the legal programs.
We might need a read back on that.
Yeah, one more time.
It's a good thing I wrote it down. All right. The mission would be to protect the public good by ensuring quality, ethical, and accessible legal programs.
I know, so, okay. Let's take a vote. Okay. And what you did, Lisa, when you did that, it sounds like you took the core values and then fit them into your mission, right? Okay, great. Yeah, the ones that you wanted to make sure were at the forefront of what the accrediting agency thought about. All right. Marty, you want to pick that apart?
Well, I don't know if protect the public good grammatically works for me, because you can promote the public good, ensure the public good, or protect the public, but I don't know if you protect the public good. And then ensuring quality, ethical, and accessible legal programs. So, I mean, I don't think we're accrediting all legal programs, we're accrediting JD programs, so I think we should be more specific about that. If we're assuming accessible subsumes affordable, I'm okay with that. And I guess I'm not entirely sure what is meant by ethical, because is it that they're training the students in the ethical practice of law? Is it that they're ethical in the transparency in terms of what they disclose to prospective students? So yeah, you know, I love playing defense lawyer, right? I could pick apart a theory of the case all day long, But it's a pretty good start. I mean,
Right.
for one pithy sentence, it's a good step. So thank you.
Well, and she started with quality, ethics, and accessible. You would add affordable, and you also want to understand the context for ethics.
Context for ethics, and maybe tweak the phrase "protect the public good."
Yeah, and so and Lisa, just for clarity, were you talking about graduating ethical? Okay, so our transparency, honesty, and communication. So the transparency. So you're underneath ethics. You're really thinking about that transparency. Okay, transparency.
And
So how about-
I would assume, by the way, that ethical program could include providing a meaningful opportunity, right? You're not letting in people who have, no possible chance, but you're also, giving people a chance who you don't know for sure are going to make it, but they have a reasonable prospect of doing so, and they should be given that chance to see what they can do.
So it goes back to the public comment about that while we're an opportunity school, it needs to be a meaningful opportunity, that the admissions process does needs to recognize that not everyone can be successful in a legal program, okay? Or on the retention side, which is currently recognized in our guidelines in terms of not retaining people who are able to be successful, rather than on the admission side. Thank you, Lisa.
So Jackie, are you through with public comment?
I will shut it down, yes.
Well, you don't, I'll wait.
No. Does anyone else want to add to what Lisa brought forward? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah.
Because that's the nature of my comment is to take that with something I was typing away at over
Yeah.
here, so. So accreditation by the State Bar of California promotes the public good by standards for assuring quality, ethical, and accessible California-approved law schools. And California-approved is a shorthand for accredited and registered, but we'll see where those terms end up going through this process. State Bar accreditation ensures institutional accountability, promotes continuous improvement through self and peer review, and encourages innovation and accessibility for the purpose of providing student outcomes leading to a meaningful opportunity to join the legal profession and serve the public.
Is there any way for you to cut and paste that and send it to Natalie? And you're going to put it on the thumb drive.
sure
That's
can.
great. In any, just for those who were able to capture any thoughts about what Greg put forth or what Lisa provided? Yeah.
Just a second. Let's see, where is it? Drive E maybe? Is that it? That's it. There we go. So that's so you got the whole statement there. Let me save it locally as well, just in case, Let's put it here. Oh, sure.
And yeah, I want to, because we talked a lot last time about diversity, equity, inclusion as being important, not just to us, the State Bar. We brought the Equity and Inclusion Committee's mission statement forward. We used the term accessible, and we used the term opportunity. It doesn't necessarily encompass diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'm wondering, do we think that's important to incorporate there? Is it one of those core values that we would list and then further explicate on in an attached document? Because we talk about opportunity, we talk about accessible, we talk about it really as shorthand for that concept of diversity with a small d, a large swath of those who are unable to attend traditional law schools. I want to make sure we don't lose sight of whether we can leave it as shorthand and whether we need to have a specific value that's spelled out about those concepts. Yeah. All right. So are we going to be able to get that up on the board? But thoughts? Kareem, I know that was something that was really important to you. Is it important for you to have it explicit in the mission, or enough for it to be listed as a core value that then gets has an underlying document attached to it for what it means?
Yeah, I like that. I like that. That speaks more to some of the conversations we've had today and how they associate with each other. I think that while the idea is diversity, equity, and inclusion, affordability, and access. Sorry. I'm always telling people, and I should. I think some of the conversations today have led to understanding what affordability, opportunity, and access means. But I think putting it in the core values, I think, is probably a little better served as it operates as a foundation, and the mission's kind of more focused.
Yeah, great. So, can we blow that up a little bit, Michael? Is that possible? There we go.
That should be public, by the way.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Well, now we're wordsmithing, but okay.
It was only a draft.
Yeah, well, it was typed rather quickly, too. I must say, I'm still a little troubled by ethical there and what exactly that means. I mean, if we wanted to put the word inclusive in there instead, for example, that might be more.
Well, I mean, the thing is,
I'm not sure what it means to be an ethical law school. I know what it
well,
means to be an inclusive law school.
well, so to me, inclusive could be subsumed within accessible, just like affordable could. And if by ethical we mean transparent, that could be subsumed within quality.
Well, and a lot of other accrediting agencies do use the term transparent. So if that is in part about what we're talking about, honesty and communication, transparency, et cetera, we could certainly say transparent. It doesn't quite flow, but it's a word that provides more clarity.
So I think one of the words that we hear a lot, right, as you said, transparency, quality, accessible. I think having inclusive there is good. I think accountability is one of the other words that we hear. Accountability. Keep going.
So the words, this is Greg. So the words that come later it can include other values and so on, but they describe what the standards do. The first sentence says we have standards for this purpose. The second sentence says the standards do the following. So that's kind of the structure I was using. So the first sentence is really Lisa's sentence, or something, my best transcription of it. And then the second sentence is what I was going to try to get more of the purposes into it.
We don't have transparency or flexibility in there. We talked a lot about that last week.
Okay.
People were very concerned about those two.
Yep. And again, I don't know what.
A really good point that not everybody wants to become a lawyer, and that we kind of on the notion that doing our job and accrediting a school doesn't necessarily mean you're going to graduate a lawyer. You may graduate somebody else. You've got a great legal education, and that's.
It's a good point.
So this gets cumbersome the longer we do it.
We just started.
Yeah.
Don't lose hope. Okay. So one question would be, how important is it to have affordability as a separate concept embedded in the mission?
I think that's pretty important.
I do too.
But again, I'd replace ethical with affordable, for example. I think that belongs right up front.
And that's how I always talk about a quality, affordable, accessible legal education. So I don't think there's a word that doubles for affordable. Yeah. And Natalie raises a point that we may want to crystallize the values, because that's where Lisa originally started with hers, quality, ethics, and in that she meant transparency, honesty, kind of a meaningful opportunity for students to succeed, accessible, we have affordable. We talked about diversity, equity, inclusion as a value. What are some other in there? We've got accountability is in there, certainly something that we talked about last week.
Would you like us to flip back to those values?
No, let's stay here, because I think this is at least I think Greg and with Lisa's start incorporated a lot, and then we can figure out what's missing. It goes to that meaningful opportunity that was raised. Continuous improvement and peer review were both concepts that we talked about last time. Yeah, it did get fit in the ethics side of things. So ethics includes transparency, honesty of communication, and that idea of meaningful opportunity, which is also mentioned separately. Greg?
Where in my own edit, there's accessibility is now there twice.
Yeah.
So in that second iteration after the word innovation, we could perhaps replace that with transparent or something along those lines. Transparency or something of that sort.
Jay?
Just in that same area, I was thinking potentially changing it to diversity, because I think that's really what we're trying to encourage. Encourage innovation and diversity, diversity as to student population, diversity as to teaching methodologies, and even whether it's online or brick and mortar.
And encourages is a good place, good lead-in word to that.
Right.
Can't ensure diversity, but you can
It
encourage
could
it.
ensure transparency. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we want to do more than promote transparency. We probably
Yeah.
want to.
Well, it's you could put it, good point. I mean, you can put it, as Marty said, right after the accountability.
And
accountability and transparency.
Is there any public comment?
Sorry, I'm being an inveterate wordsmith. The first sentence, honestly, I think would read better. It says, promotes the public good through academic standards to assure quality, affordable, accessible California law schools. I think through, certainly, and question whether academic, you ought to throw in academic.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, that's
Because is it promulgating standards? Is it enforcing standards?
Lisa was making a point about that. Well, the distinction is assuring the schools or assuring that you have standards that lead to the schools of a certain kind. So it's kind of a question of which burden the State Bar wants to take on. State Bar takes on the burden of having standards. Well, that we can definitely accomplish. And then the question is whether we can definitely assure that all the schools are all these things. So there is actually a distinction in the meaning of those words, which way you write this. So I took it with standards because I thought that's where Lisa was going with her comment. So I was trying to be true to the comment.
It's easier to read with the settings than,
Oh, yes.
You all might disagree, but I see affordability and accessibility, or affordability as part of accessibility. So when we call out like 3 really important things for the State Bar, the tenets of who we are, I would hate for 2 words to be too closely together. quality is one thing, affordability or accessibility would be my vote.
Yeah, and I'm someone who sees them as different.
Different, okay.
You could have a completely accessible legal education that costs $150,000 a year.
See, and I would say then it's not accessible.
True, but I think so I'll be transparent, ethical about why I want affordable specifically in there. It's because I want the State Bar to be very conscious of regulatory standards that raise costs for schools. So if their mission is to promote or help maintain an affordable legal education, then we get to have the conversation every time
Got
a
it.
standard is there.
Makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. Then just, I would ask that we ask ourselves if we should get rid of accessible and pick another value.
Okay. Inclusive and affordable and inclusive, California approved. So
So we have both actually, inclusive and accessible, and I would argue that that affordable is a piece of accessible.
Yeah.
Because it can be entirely affordable, but it's only a day school and it's not online. So I would actually argue to keep both, and I am. If you'd like somebody to say it out loud, I am entirely comfortable keeping affordable because the State Bar recognizes that a value of the registered and the California accredited schools is that they provide opportunities, including lower cost legal education opportunities to people who simply wouldn't have access if we only had ABAs. That is absolutely a value that those schools provide.
Great.
And the data we saw today proves the effect of that to some degree. The survey data on debt and the rest of it. So.
Well, so
yeah.
Since we're nitpicking, so I'm concerned about replacing accessible with inclusive.
Yeah.
Not that I don't want inclusive in there, but I think we can more likely assure accessibility through standards than we can ensure inclusivity through standards, whereas just like we can encourage innovation and diversity, we can encourage diversity and inclusion. And I don't think that inclusion is broad enough to encapsulate everything that accessibility reflects.
And it does go back to the idea that in addition to the mission statement, we can have a set of values that
Right.
includes diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then explicate that more for the public. I would like to know if I present this to somebody and they say, "What do you mean promotes the public good?" What is it that the State Bar is going to be like? What is that?
I think that's a good question. Not that specifically. What I'm saying is, I think that we should look at this statement as a working statement. As we start developing rules or guidelines, whatever the next step is, because I think the next step is for us to look at our current framework to see how this compares against this. We might want to come back and finesse this. So I think it's good to maybe step away from this and maybe move into the current review the current guidelines and rules, because perhaps we'll need to go back, or perhaps we find another area that will measure exactly what you're describing, like things that come up are what is meaningful, how do we gauge that, and maybe through the rule development some of that will be fleshed out.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Any other things that people feel they want to include or?
I'd like to suggest we include inclusivity.
Yeah.
Where we are about to say and diversity, we could just say and encourages innovation, inclusivity, and diversity. Because I think it's an important word to have in our conversation. I like it as a value as well, but it certainly fits as one of the things we wish to encourage.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that addition.
I think it's who's the magic person doing this right now? Oh, okay. I think he said inclusivity. There you go.
Inclusivity.
There you go. Okay. I do want to talk about, because it came up last time, join the legal profession and serve the public. I actually don't see that as simply passing the bar and having a license to practice. And last time I talked about the the way that the legal profession is growing in terms of the business of delivering law versus the kind of law practice idea. And so I think there's going to be an expansive number of ways to join the legal profession and or serve the public that doesn't involve passing the bar and having a license to practice law. So in some ways, I find that to be broad enough to allow our graduates who either choose not to or who are unsuccessful on the bar that we're still meeting that underlying kind of goal.
Well, and I'd accept the amendment to just stop it after the word educational opportunity, period. We don't have to say we don't have to be that specific about what educational opportunity this is. Obviously, this is a particular kind, but a meaningful educational, I guess that word educational is not in there. I'd put educational opportunity and then end it after that word opportunity. And we can leave the rest out if there are concerns about narrowing the field too much. I mean, many of us should be in the business of training people to do a variety of different jobs with legal education, and we'll need to be in that business going forward. So I think it's reasonable to end it there.
What are other people's thoughts about not including kind of that almost postgraduate kind of what we're there for? Yeah.
I'm more for including it. Again, if the purpose of accreditation is to qualify to sit for the bar, and I think we have our safety language in there, where it's saying a meaningful opportunity, not a guarantee. And as I mentioned in our previous meeting, in my population, 4% never sits for the bar of graduates. But we provide the meaningful opportunity if they wish to exercise it. Only other thought was, when it talks about student outcomes, again, just for the languaging, student learning outcomes, I think is a common term that we're using in higher education all the time now.
So just so I'm clear, and diversity for the purposes of providing student learning outcomes.
Because that's what we're trying to develop, I believe, and embed in the system.
Well, I would agree that I would like to keep in to join the legal profession, serve the public for similar reasons that Jay said, even though not all of our graduates, want to become licensed attorneys. The fact of the matter is, that's one of the main benefits of being, whether it's registered or, accredited, right? I mean, there's a certain threshold you have to meet to even be able to sit for the bar. And there are non-JD programs where you could, get some law-related education and do other things that don't do that. I wonder, though, if we even need providing student learning outcomes leading to. What if it's, right, encouraging innovation, inclusion, diversity for the purpose of providing a meaningful educational opportunity? I mean, it seems implicit that you've got to have good student learning outcomes or you're not going to have the rest of that sentence. I don't know, I mean...
so you would take out the phrase student learning outcomes.
Leading to. But I don't feel strongly about it, I'm just trying to make it tighter. I don't think it's wrong or bad, I just think it might not be essential.
So providing a meaningful opportunity to join the legal profession and serve the public. And you would support leaving in, Brian, to join the legal profession and serve the public as an important...
Yes, I think so. I mean, to serve the public, I guess every attorney is an officer of the court serving the public in some way or another. Not all attorneys go into public service. That's what that's supposed to mean. So I have a little trouble with that.
Right.
All right, how about this? So, for the purpose of providing a meaningful educational opportunity, either to join the legal profession and serve the public, or for meeting individual educational goals. Or something like that. I'll say it again. For the purpose of providing a meaningful educational opportunity, either to join the legal profession and serve the public, or for meeting individual educational goals.
Well, to be parallel, it should be either to join or to meet individual educational
Well, I think the problem I might have with that is putting on my accrediting agency hat. I don't know if that's what the it might be what our individual school missions might be. I'm not sure that the accreditor is there to ensure that we have a meaningful educational opportunity so that someone can meet their individual educational goals.
Well, that would be true if it was from the consumer protection or public protection standpoint, if you're assuring the quality of a program, regardless of the purpose of that program, students are going to have a variety of goals for taking that program. I don't want to get this too close to like gainful employment kind of stuff where it's got to all be tied back to some particular job. I don't think that makes sense.
And that's the one kind of issue with to join the legal profession and public where we do have people who are not interested in that particular goal. But again, it's the accreditor. They're accrediting a JD program, so does their mission need to link back to that in some way?
So I would, as the regulator, I'd be more comfortable with the earlier discussion of ending it after meaningful educational opportunity than expanding this part of the clause. Because as a sort of mission statement, to provide a meaningful educational opportunity, then when we sort of tie that to our rules, one of the rules would be a passing rate of some level. That is one way to ensure the meaningful opportunity, and we'll talk about sort of other ways to ensure that you're providing a meaningful educational opportunity to meet some of those individualized goals.
So you're saying this edit that's on the board now would allow for more variation actually in the rules in terms of what it means for you to have completed your accrediting guidelines? I mean, it's either a pass rate if you're going to go take the bar, or it's something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think it provides. I think it's sort of the right level for a mission statement, and how we ensure that meaningful educational opportunity, we would do in the guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
We would do in the rules themselves.
Yeah, public comment?
Is it possible to just have the period after diversity?
It's a long sentence.
Well, now it's shorter.
Yeah.
In what? In the administration of illegal education? Do we have to have something that finishes that phrase?
You don't have to.
That kind of implies the flexibility issue too that we talked about last week, and giving individual schools the right to be innovative.
I could be sold on that. I do have a couple of other unrelated comments, I think, but, oh, sorry, George, go ahead.
I'm back to nitpick, if I may. So the first sentence, I think maybe is a clearer, more direct statement to say by setting standards to assure accessible, to assure access to quality and affordable California-approved law schools.
I like that.
Because if the emphasis to provide access to, and then up to what, quality and affordable, that would be.
I like that.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Lisa.
Well, so I would add to that, do we want to say high quality? Because
let's not go crazy.
I mean, I assume it's implicit in quality, but
speak for yourself.
I don't know. I mean, I almost think without the modifier, it's almost like a colloquialism. That's quality. That's a good law school. We mean high quality. So it'd be high quality, access to high quality and affordable.
Affordable and accessible?
Well, we don't need it because we have access now, right?
Oh, right. We can take and accessible.
And affordable. Yeah. And then why do we have California approved law schools? Isn't that circular?
And
So,
Why not just-
substitute in there California accredited and registered law schools if you want?
Well, what-
We're referring to, that's the purpose of the accreditation, is to promote this kind of law school in California.
Right, but isn't that I mean, if you're having accreditation by the state bar, you're necessarily, are you saying to account for accredited and unaccredited registered? Is that the reason for that phrase?
Yeah, yeah.
So you could just say legal education.
Or just law schools, high quality and affordable law schools.
We got it. Part of the reason for that was also to be sure the ABA folks don't think this is about them. Because if you take that California narrowing phrase out of there, then it sounds like we're writing something that would encompass ABA schools. And maybe that, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't personally care.
Well, but I mean,
It might be popular.
I mean, ABA schools in California, aren't they deemed accredited by the California
Yes.
state bar? Isn't that why they're
Yes.
allowed to sit for the bar exam?
Yes.
So, do we need to, I don't know that we need to run from that, right? I mean, I would think we high quality, affordable California law schools.
At the same time, though, having the state bar education focuses on the rule set that we're trying to create. So it might be a little bit more descriptive.
To say which?
To say state bar versus California. Because there is a distinction in what happens and what the opportunities are afterward, and so it is helpful.
Right, but, well, and this gets back to my original point, right, which is that that's why the sentence starts accreditation by the State Bar of California. By definition, you know, it's going to be State Bar accredited or approved. I mean, maybe we say regulation by the State Bar of California. I mean, you see what?
yeah, I do.
Like accreditation by the State Bar of California to ensure access to State Bar accredited schools seems circular.
So, I'm sorry, I was looking up the rule myself here to figure, but the rule already does say that an ABA school is deemed accredited, right? So we already know that. So are you saying that we should just say law schools and just leave it at that?
Right.
Because they already do take care of the ABA situation anyway.
Right. But now I guess the wrinkle is, does that take care of unaccredited registered as well, because they are not actually
Accredited by the state bar.
Well, but the rules provide for how registered schools can gain accreditation. So, I mean, they do address registered schools.
Well, so maybe this is a fundamental question. What is this the mission statement of?
And
The CBE, I think, right?
so it's yes. So is this mission statement applying to registered and accredited law schools? Because right now it says accreditation by the State Bar of California. And so that would assume that it's for the California accredited law schools and would not apply to the registered law school rules and guidelines.
Yes, and we're looking at both guidelines, both sets, accreditation and registered, so somehow we probably need to.
We're starting with accredited.
But do you want this mission statement to be broad enough to encompass both sets of rules and guidelines? So we wouldn't say accredited by the state bar, but I think someone said regulated by the state.
Regulation by the State Bar of
State
California?
Bar of California regulation promotes, or law school regulation, but we could kind of figure out how best to phrase that. So that was a good catch, Marty, in terms of.
I mean, we really are focusing on, starting with focus is on the accredited schools. That's where the primary focus of this discussion is right now.
But even in that, do we really want two mission statements? I mean, couldn't we morph this into one mission statement for both? And
Right,
that
by
suggestion.
wordsmithing it a little bit, yeah. I did want to just offer us an opportunity to test drive this. And Amy, I don't know if you have like a guideline or a rule or something that you want to throw out, and we could kind of see, okay, how does this play out when we superimpose it on a particular rule or guideline? Is there something that you like thought of?
So, Natalie, one of your slides, you had the list of the categories of our current guidelines. And perhaps we could start with that.
Yeah, Russia, probably about 6 slides ahead. It's the buckets.
And thank you for starting us out on kind of crafting that mission.
If you really wanted to go down that rabbit hole, and now maybe I wonder if you did.
Oh, do we want to go down a rabbit hole?
No, I wondered if you really wanted to go down the rabbit hole of drafting or not.
Oh, yeah, well, I think it got us off to a good start, and so I'm glad that Lisa started us off, and Greg, that you followed up with some language that we could work with, so thank you.
So, Jackie, these are the categories of the current rules.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea is to look at these and see how they align with the values. And then perhaps, I don't know if you want to take a view to dive in specifically, for example, looking at the honest integrity, the rules pertaining to honesty and integrity, and how they compare against the value statement.
Well, and
mission statement.
Yeah, so, just to recognize that the mission statement doesn't include everything, that's kind of where the values come in. So, for example, we didn't end up having ethics or transparency, I think, directly in the mission statement, but if it shows up on the value list, then it becomes embedded in what it is that the State Bar will be looking at. Anyone have any kind of, you have the rules in front of you right now.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So anything kind of jump out that you want to kind of put out there and we can test drive it?
Let me just like pull out one rule under one of these guidelines. Which one, okay, which category would you like? Look at my game show. We're talking about disclosures and communications, maybe. Where's that? I don't seem to have that in this set for some reason. Honesty and integrity.
Right,
Oh,
no, these are not the actual categories of the rules. These are a combination of the groups and the processes. And one of the issues is that the way that the rules are organized now, someone talked about a prescriptive list. Some accreditors, in particular programmatic accreditors, have sort of the prescriptive list model that the State Bar uses today, whereas many others use a more functional approach that is divided by group. And so what we're trying to do is think about the ways that we might group the rules to bounce them back against. Okay. And so this is a not existing intermediary to give a way to think about the rules.
Okay. Well, can we have the draft mission statement back up?
Is it possible to get that? Because I mean, the categories could certainly fit in, but there are particular rules that I know of that I'm like, I have no idea why that's a rule.
Oh, that's what you want me to look for? I have one that I think I know why is a rule, but you can read it and then view it as against, or listen to it and view it as against this mission statement. So this is Rule 1.8. A law school may offer and grant academic credit for a bar examination review or preparation course. A law school may also require successful completion of a bar examination review or preparation course as a condition of graduation. Now, where does that fit in what we're talking about? Does this somehow run afoul of this statement? This is part of our quality, it's part of our JD, it's part of getting into legal education and administering it. I think it's not going to run afoul of that mission anywhere.
Meaningful educational opportunity.
And then here's another one. This is the one I was initially going to read.
I will point out we took out meaningful educational opportunity as it currently exists right now.
Oh yeah, that's at the bottom.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Oh, I see, okay.
So here's another one on honesty and integrity. A law school must be honest and forthright in all of its activities. A law school must establish and maintain procedures and practices that demonstrate an ongoing commitment to ensuring that every law school activity is conducted honestly and in a forthright manner.
Right.
So we've got a lot of that.
Transparency, right.
Transparency, ethical, innovation. I mean, I don't know what else you want to look at.
Can people think of rules or guidelines that they're dealing with that either run counter to this or don't fit easily?
Oh, the annual report that we have to do costs too much money. That's not going to make it affordable. That's one of my pet peeves around here anyway. So.
I'll just throw out a really simple one. It's one that I put on the list. The requirement that every class have a textbook. One, I think it's a little bit too much in the weeds. Two, it's incredibly expensive to buy law school textbooks. There's a lot of open source and free material. Professors will often curate their own material now. The idea that the state bar would dictate that every class has to have a textbook is one that I don't think is necessary for a high quality legal education and actually runs counter to affordability.
One thing that I would ask for as a staff person as we go forward and do this is that I can see the ways in which you would use this well, in fact, in fostering the creativity and innovation. That's something that I know that your school personally develops. But then also there is the other side of the coin, the class which would not have a textbook and would be a collection of my contemporaneous anecdotes, which may not be sufficient to fulfill the mission. And so I would encourage you to honor the good intentions of the schools in general, but also to give the State Bar an opportunity to balance with those that could have different intentions at times.
Fair enough. This has been an ongoing discussion. But it seems to me that there's a way to talk about curriculum, and there's a way to talk about innovation in teaching and a high quality law school experience that doesn't allow for war stories to be the basis of the classroom experience without dictating that every class needs to have a textbook for fear that someone will use war stories.
Agreed, and I think that will be part of the challenge of the group, because I do think that there is in fact a path through there the way that you described.
Well, and there's other rules like the 80% attendance requirement. I think there was a rule in here I saw that said you have to have an actual final exam in every class, unless those are primarily practice-oriented kind of things. I mean, you know, we haven't really started that process of going through this rule by rule, but I'm sure there's others that would maybe get in the way of the flexibility that's included in encouraging innovation. I don't know.
We've already started to get questions about what attendance means in a sync, async, online, on-demand world.
Right. Attendance is not defined in here anywhere, other than the 80%.
Great.
Well, I was going to respond on the textbook kind of level of regulation notion. And again, that's not what the regional accreditors do. It's not even what the DEAC used to have when it was DETC, it had a set of standards that was much more like that, and it no longer has those because the Department of Ed does not favor those any longer either. It makes it easy to sort of go in and check boxes if the approach to sort of a review is that kind of approach, but the approach to accreditation more generally now is a lot more holistic than that. So, and obviously it does cost money and create innovation challenges. That's what I meant earlier about, it seems like there were probably things in here that are kind of a collection of good ideas that folks had at one time. We need to have this because it does something particular for us. And so we have to be cautious about those things.
Yeah, and I'm curious, and because Jay, I know this is something that you're very conscious of, kind of that evidence-based continuous improvement loop that we want all schools to be engaged in. Can you think of a rule or guideline that promotes continuous improvement through self and peer review?
I think the best example is attachment 18 in the annual report, where we have to go through and account for our academic component and how we're improving it.
Anything other than the state bar where we have an evidence-based rule or guideline, something that kind of requires us to use evidence?
Well, the new guidelines respecting the design of the education, so the replacement for 6.5 in the accredited rules that we spent years working on, they take the stance that the school decides what tool for developing a particular learning outcome is the best tool, whatever kind of learning experience it is. But inherent in that is that they have to be able to demonstrate through evidence that over time it is in fact the best tool, or at least a competent tool for delivering that learning outcome. So it's inherent in, already in the guideline that we prepared and delivered to develop, move the schools toward this ability to accredit those types of programs that were more innovative and flexible in design.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Would it be helpful to get a brief example of College Unbound very quickly?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. You have an example of a mission statement.
Well, it's not exactly the specific mission statement, but it can be some quick ways.
Yeah.
So, Russia, I don't know if you can find the slide. I think it's 22, Accreditors Balance Innovation and Regulation. Just quickly, this could be a whole meeting in itself, but I'll just bring up the idea of a school. It is not a law school. It's an undergraduate school that is NEASC accredited. It's on the East Coast, and it's called College Unbound. And in some ways, I think it shares some elements of this mission. So this school, like many of the schools you've talked about today, has a very specific mission. It's to promote college graduation for college dropouts. So you must have attended at least 1 year of school, but you didn't finish. So they start with 100% college dropouts, and they finish with an 80% graduation rate. But they do that by doing a lot of creative things. First of all, they keep costs low by having no fixed facility, but they work hard with the community to get community spaces, in part through projects with the students to develop job training skills and job skills to come up with those spaces. They have childcare. They feed meals at the classes because timing is an issue for many of these. And they have intensive advising, which has worked in some instances and hasn't provided the benefits in others in educational settings. But for them, it does work. And so they have an 80% graduation rate. 71% of their senior projects actually happen and go into use in the community. Many job opportunities come out of that, and 87% are employed in a degree advantage job at graduation because they do take advantage of that innovation and flexibility. And NEASC, as Jackie said, works hard as an accreditor to figure out how to work with a school like that that has a laser-focused mission that does some things that are creative but tied against constant measurement. And it was a challenge when they started to show that they could deliver on this benefit, but right from the beginning, they did so. They kept very good metrics. They were constantly evolving, and they recently achieved accreditation. And the quote that we started with last time on the 11th comes from Jamie Studley at WASC, essentially admiring the process of that NEASC used and encouraging that thinking at WASC.
Thanks.
So that's a way that this could work.
Right. So I really appreciate, again, the time and attention. If we have a starting place for the mission, I think we could still spend some time making sure that we've identified anything that didn't get captured in the mission that we want to make sure is still a part of the values that the State Bar is using to guide our accreditation process and the implementation of it. I'm going to ask that maybe cut and paste it to the CS Bar's member. I know we need to tweak or figure out how to fit State Bar regulation rather than accreditation so that the mission encompasses both the registered and accredited rules and guidelines. And then perhaps we can share this with our respective stakeholders, get some feedback, hear what is missing, what they think still needs to be in there, what values they want to be included or made sure is part of the conversation, so that when we come back in December, perhaps we will actually have a draft that we're comfortable as a committee passing some judgment on and saying, is this something that we want to present to the Committee of Bar Examiners as guidance from CS Bars for the starting place, and then and I think perhaps in December, if we feel solid about it, we can actually start to do some of the stuff that Amy suggested, which is playing it off on some of the rules and guidelines, seeing where we missed something, or does it work well in the next step of the process, which is to use it to shape the rules and guidelines. I actually won't be here for the December meeting. I will be out of town, but thankfully Greg Brandis has agreed to chair the meeting, so we will go forward with the December meeting. You guys will just have to soldier on without me, as difficult as that may be for you all to imagine. And then, yes, Donna, do you want to follow up?
Yes, I do find that difficult to imagine. But just a caution, as you are sharing this with the other school, with the schools and getting feedback, if there is an email distribution list that is going out to all of the schools, you've got you've got a majority of the members of CS bars on that distribution list. So you really can't be having a back and forth email discussion about, we agree to this, you're right, that's a bad idea. Oh, Jill, what you said was super smart. Because then you're having a meeting outside of the public sphere.
Yes.
So we just need to figure out a way to construct it so you can send the information out and get feedback back, but not be having sort of an email discussion.
And it wouldn't be uncommon for people to send comments directly to me at the State Bar, and I can aggregate them for a future meeting. In this case, the December meeting.
Right.
If we do that, we do it through staff.
And we're happy to do that.
Yeah. And thanks for pointing that out, Donna. Right now, I don't think there's a registered listserv where, and there is a CALS, but we will be very careful that the information is sent, but discussions don't happen. And if there is a shared phone call, that we'll make sure that there are only one or two of us available for that call. So I appreciate you highlighting that for us to make sure we didn't run afoul of Bagley-Keene. Any other things that people want to raise before we adjourn for the day? Again, really appreciate the attention of the members and of the public. I think we've taken a really big step forward today, and I appreciate your attention to it. And I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, and so we are adjourned. Thank you.